Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody who's joining us for the webinar, whether on Facebook Live or through Zoom. It's my pleasure to welcome you. I will briefly welcome you before I hand over to our chairperson for the day. We've got a great session lined up today. For the first time, I think, on our webinars, and we've been having these now for several months through the year. We've got a speaker from each continent, well, certainly from 4 continents. We've yet to have a speaker from Antarctica, but that might be a first at some stage. And we've got a tremendous, very pertinent subject for you today. Global compliance gaps in dangerous goods logistics, with 4 very different perspectives on this. So I'm going to hand over now to our chairperson for the day, who will be introducing the speakers and chairing the whole webinar. So it's with great pleasure that I can introduce Reshma Yusuf, who is from CILT Malaysia. Reshma is the director of the Center for Logistics Leadership in Business in Malaysia, and very experienced in running webinars already in CILT for WILAT. So it's great for Reshma to take the chair today. So over to you, Reshma.
Thank you very much, Keith. Good day, everybody. We're on totally different time zones from pretty much all over the world. So I'm just going to stick to good day because it could be pretty much anytime, anywhere for all of you. I would love to thank CILT International for allowing me to moderate today's webinar. And today is a really interesting session. Today, we've got people from experts on our panel from all around the world, pretty much covering transportation and storage compliance issues related to dangerous goods. So we have from Canada, we have Lee with us, Lee Nelson from Canada, and he's going to touch on rail transportation of dangerous goods and the compliance issues that we face there, the gaps that we face in the rail transport sector. We've also got Michael Joyce, and Michael Joyce is joining us from Ireland, and he's going to touch on road transportation of dangerous goods. And Michael's going to cover pretty much all the regimes and the issues that we have in the various regimes that we have to follow when we talk about road transportation of dangerous goods. And from my country, from Malaysia, we have Mr. Ravindran K, who will be joining us, and he will talk to us with regards to maritime dangerous goods. And from Australia, we have Victor Gado, and Victor's going to talk to us about storage of dangerous goods. So this webinar is really timely because we just, all of us witnessed that horrible explosion that took place in Beirut. And this webinar, we're going to look at how do these issues actually take place? What are the root causes? Is it a compliance issue? Is it with regards to information, communication of information? Or is it just a lack of self-compliances, meaning that companies are now generally because of the COVID situation that we're having, and companies are very concerned with their supply chain cost and cost constraints. Are they overlooking safety compliance when it comes to dangerous goods? So let us start the session today, and allow me to introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker, as I mentioned, he's coming all the way from Canada. I mean, he's not physically joining us, but he is virtually joining us, and it's 4 a.m. in the morning. Lee Nelson, he's the operations manager at the Emergency Response Assistance Canada. He is in charge of or responsible for the management of the ER Assistance Plan program that covers about 270 oil and gas company transportation. And he himself has handled about 100 hazardous material incidents in Canada itself. So without much ado, allow me to now pass the floor to Lee. Lee, are you ready to take on the session?
I believe I'm ready. It's early, but let's go for it. Let me share my screen. Well, good morning, everyone. Very early, chilly morning from Western Canada. So a brief look at the regulatory framework if you're going to ship through Canada, dangerous goods wise. So our regulators, Transport Canada, they're going to set up the requirements for the consigners, the consignees, and the carriers here as far as moving your materials inside the country. What we find specifically for railways, which is where I've spent much of my time, they're under what we would call a common carrier agreement to transport dangerous goods, which essentially means if your material is classified and packaged per the regulation, a railroad cannot refuse to take it, which allows access to this form of transportation. One place where a railroad will have an exception here, and we'll see that they have some choice whether or not they want to ship particular material, is if you're using intermodal as your means of transit. The railroad is able to refuse materials there, as they will say that you are able to truck it, so they've not denied you the ability to move your material across the country. The means of containment, as far as tank cars by rail, is established in TP 14877, which is essentially just going to provide the common name and engineering specifications for the tank cars that you need to use per specific materials. And then intermodal tanks are authorized by their UN spec. Loading requirements, which should be essentially the same all across the world, with a couple of unique things here. The shipper consigner chooses their package and owns their package. The railroad's not going to own the tank cars or the intermodal tanks that you're going to use here. The basics here, the shipments can't leak when they're in transit. They all have to have their secondary closures. They have to adhere to a no leak standard. So that can be liquid exiting the container. That can also be vapor. The containers have to be completely tight in shipment. The third bullet point here often causes delays for people who are importing into Canada dangerous goods shipments, whether they're coming in CCAN or UN ISO tank here. The 5 in, 5 up rule has been established by the railroads because they transport these containers most of the time in a double stack configuration. And if your ISO tank or container ends up being the bottom unit, they sit in what's called a well car. And if the placards are not mounted high enough, which would be unique to what the railroad needs, they are covered by the rail car. And then that will end up as a citation by Transport Canada to the railroad. So your shipment will end up delayed if the placards are not placed this 5 feet, 1.5 meters high, and then 1.5 meters in from the end. Kind of a unique setup there. And then same thing, the shipping documents need to be provided by the consignor to the railway. Any error here will generate an automatic refusal by the railway to put them on the train at that point. So you have to work ahead to make sure that your format works correctly. Basic railway requirements: once your shipment is accepted by the railroad, the conductor is going to do a basic ground level inspection of your shipment, just that your safety marks match the shipping papers, container's not leaking, it appears secure and mechanically sound. The railroad is then federally regulated as far as switching, essentially organizing the train in yards, marshaling where they can put your shipment in the train prior to exiting, and then how fast the train can travel based on what it's carrying. So all that's going to affect which train your materials end up on. Typically, we find that the dangerous goods will not end up on the faster moving trains across the country because they're subject to speed restrictions. So they get put in a manifest train that's going to move a little bit slower and stop more often. The part that I wanted to spend a little more time on today, as far as I know, this is unique to Canada. So we have what they call an ERAC requirement. So that's an emergency response assistance plan. So if you are a shipper of, an importer of high hazard dangerous goods, you are required to have essentially a pre-plan for what happens if you have an emergency with your shipment. And the pre-plan has to be fairly robust, and it's audited by the government, and they will issue a plan number once they're satisfied with your plan. So to determine if your shipment requires an ERAC, you would look in Schedule 1 of the TDG regulations, look at the amount of the material you're hauling, and then that's going to flag you if you have to have an ERAC. What the ERAC has to lay out for you is trained personnel. So this typically has to be, this could be an online component to this training so that they're familiar with your material, the handling, the gas detection if appropriate, or positive identification of your material, specialty equipment, and it has to be identified all along the route that your shipment will travel. So whether that's pumps, hoses, chemical protective suits, respiratory protection, ability to reheat and liquefy a material so that it can be transloaded. This all has to be established, and it all has to be tested and trained prior to shipping. And then you have to provide technical advisors for the containers and products that you're shipping. So where most of us are used to having to provide a 24-hour number that someone can contact to get some basic information, you will have to provide a second 24-hour phone number on your shipping document, as well as an ERAC reference number, which will then flag very specifically which plan this is that's been approved by Transport Canada. When you call this phone number, the ability to then activate the pre-plan here and get things moving to help first responders or the carrier deal with an incident should it have happened. So to give you a basic idea of what that's going to look like. So this is one particular incident that's happened about 7 months ago. So on the left, you have a derailment involving quite a bit of propane, which was going for export at this point. So you have 8 tank cars of propane plus multiple other commodities that were involved in the incident. The carrier activated the ERAC, which then causes the company that I work for, we mobilize a response team and our personnel, as well as provide advice to the first responders that are on scene on gas detection, what the material does, what they need to do. When we get there, you assess each container individually, determine what needs to happen with it. Is it leaking? Its structural integrity, and then work through stabilization, transloading these materials. You can see in the middle picture there, the cars are then flared and cleaned and scrapped on site. And then finally there on the right, one car required us to perform a hot tap. We could not offload the car through the valves and fittings that were there based on damage. So the pre-plan included welding a new fitting to the car, drilling through the car, rolling the car, and using portable pumps that are all part of the ERAC to get it offloaded. So when you're establishing your ERAC, a company has a couple of options here. You can do this yourself. You can go and identify the resources across the country that you need, individually contract with each one, manage the calls as they come in to be in compliance with that. Or you can hire a company that specializes in providing the service all the way across the country, that maps the resources, that dispatches the resources on your behalf, essentially, which is what a group like mine does. But a unique setup, and having worked US and Canada so far in my career, I would say in general, this leads to a better response when there is an incident, but does require a fair bit of work ahead of time on behalf of someone wanting to bring their product in or through Canada. So with that, I will turn it back to Reshma, and thank you all very much for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you very much, Lee. That was a very insightful presentation. And it's interesting to note because when I looked at your ERAC and the fact that they apply it generally to any classes of dangerous goods, the way I see it, because I believe large quantities are moving in tanks. Like for us, we most of our ERAP, so to speak, is mostly for the class 7 and the class 1 cargoes in our part of the world. So it's interesting to know that. Thank you very much. Now we have our next speaker, and our next speaker is from Ireland, Mr. Michael Joyce. He's actually a DG consultant. He is with Michael Joyce Consulting Limited, and his consulting company offers dangerous goods safety advisor services and handle virtually any form of consultancy services related to logistics and supply chain concerning dangerous goods. So let me now pass the floor to Michael. Michael, are you okay to start?
I hope so.
All right.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody and greetings from Ireland. We seem to be moving from west to east on the time clock. In this short talk this morning, I want to just have a quick look at the history and the evolution of the regulations governing the transport of dangerous goods. I then want to focus on the road transport regulations and the variations we have in different countries. I want to share with you a small piece of research I've done on accidents involved in the transport of dangerous goods, and then finally to try and pull it together with a couple of conclusions at the end. So to look at the history of the regulations governing the transport of dangerous goods, we have to go all the way back to the end of the 19th century to 1893, when we had the first regulations which actually concerned the transport of dangerous goods by rail. And this was mainly an agreement between France and Germany. We then have to wait over 60 years until the mid-50s, the 1956, for the next set of regulations. I suppose that's not surprising, given that we had 2 world wars in the interim. We also had some horrific incidents, probably most notably the Halifax explosion in Canada way back in 1918. In the same year, in 56, we had regulations for transport of dangerous goods by air. And then in the 60s, we had the first edition of the IMDG, which I'm sure Ravi will cover later. And then in 1968, we had the first publication of ADR, which is the European Agreement on the Transport of Dangerous Goods by Road. And incidentally, next year, the word European will be dropped from the word ADR. So as the regulations have evolved, we now have the UN model regulations, which are issued by the United Nations Subcommittee of Experts every 2 years. This is what we commonly known as the Orange Book. And these biannual reviews form the basis for the revision of the modal regulations. But it's when we get to the modes we find a big divergence. For sea and for air, we have largely common regulations throughout the world. You know, we have IMDG for sea transport, and we have the ICAO technical instructions, or the IATA DGR for air. And these effectively apply to all the countries right around the world. However, when we get to road regulations, we find that there are different regulations across the different continents. And I'm going to just look at a few examples of this. This is not a comprehensive look at it. In Europe, as I mentioned earlier, we have ADR, and that's now signed by 52 countries, including 3 from Africa and 8 from Asia. The United States have their own 49 CFR. Australia have the Australian Code for the Transport of Dangerous Goods. The South American countries tend to follow the UN model regulations, the so-called Orange Book. But one of the problems here is that they're following different revisions of these regulations right back to the 11th revision, which is almost 20 years old at this stage. China have their own regs, which they are broadly based on a combination of ADR 2015 and the UN model regulations. And likewise, India have their own, and so on, different countries having their own unique regulations. Now, it has to be said, most of these regulations are based either on the Orange Book or on ADR, and they all observe the kind of the basic assumptions around the 9 classes, the UN numbers, the packing groups. But beyond that, we get into many variations. You know, for example, there are significant variations in relation to tanker and vehicle marking. And specifically on ADR has one system. HAZChem, which is used in India, Australia, United Kingdom, and other countries, has a different system. And then the UN model regulations have their own system. So just to illustrate this point, I want to just look at the example of the hazard marking on a road tanker carrying propane, which Lee mentioned earlier by coincidence, and also a vehicle carrying a mixed load in packages. So the first one, these are the types of panels we would see on a tanker in the different countries. Under ADR, we have an orange plate that has on the bottom has the UN number, which is common across all the regulations, 1978. But on the top half of that orange plate, we have what's called the hazard identification number, 23, which tells us that it's a flammable gas. If we look at the HAZChem marking, again, we find the UN number, and then we have what they call the EAC, the Emergency Action Code, 2WE. And this is essentially instructions to the emergency responders on relation to the type of spray, the type of PPE, and other actions such as evacuation to be considered. And over on the right, if we look at the UN model regulations, they simply give the UN number. All of the regulations have the same placard, the class 2 for a flammable gas. So as you can see, there's quite a variation here. And the other example that I just want to look at is a vehicle carrying dangerous goods and packages, be it an IBC or IBCs or drums or whatever. ADR again retains the orange plate format, but this time it's a plain orange plate. In Australia, we have a diamond placard, black and orange with the words dangerous goods. And under 49 CFR, we have again a placard in red with the word danger. I should add here, there are many variations and exceptions in relation to how you mark and placard a vehicle carrying dangerous goods in packages. It's quite a minefield. So much for the variations. The second question I want to ask here is, how effective are the regulations? And as always in the whole safety area, we measure the success by counting the failures. And the failures in this case are incidents and fatalities. And regrettably, we still have accidents and we still have loss of life. Some of the infamous ones over the years, in 1978, we had the horrific fire in the holiday camp in Las Alpacas in Spain, when over 217 people died when a propylene tanker exploded, or blevied as we call it. More recently in Pakistan in 2017, with 207 people died when a petrol tanker overturned and went on fire. And I'm sure many of you will have seen on YouTube the incident in Bologna in Italy, when an LPG tanker again blevied as a result of an accident. And to me, this was an example of where, because the emergency services were fully aware of what the tanker contained, they took the appropriate action and evacuated the area. And despite the massive explosion, the fatality rate was just one. Well, one is always too many, but there was a lot of infrastructural damage. There is really no central source of comprehensive source of information on accidents involving dangerous goods. And to present some figures, I looked at Hazardous Cargo Bulletin, who compile a list of incidents each month. And I carried out an analysis of the incidents for 2019. Now, I want to stress this is not a complete picture of the accidents involved in dangerous goods. And in fact, it's probably subject to a lot of underreporting. But for what it's worth, I think it tells its own story. I divided the incidents, or apportioned them by continent, although I just divided the Americas. And what we can see here on the headline figures are that 441 people lost their lives in 2019, resulting from accidents involving the transport of dangerous goods by road. And there's an absolutely disproportionate number, have died in Africa and to a lesser extent in Asia. And we see that, in Europe and the Americas, the fatality rate is much lower, and indeed Australia, where we have, more advanced regulation and probably more reporting as well. So what do we learn from this? Most of the fatalities appear to occur where we have the lowest or no level of regulation. And it shows that Africa accounts for a disproportionate number of the fatalities, and there were multiple fatality incidents. Now, there have been some developments in Africa in relation to the regulation of transport of dangerous goods. The Republic of South Africa have introduced their own regulations. Nigeria has recently signed up to ADR. But 136 of those people died as a result of the locals collecting fuel after an incident when a tanker overturned. The primary cause of a lot of them were accidents resulting from rollover or collision, and 2 were from terrorist activity. I mean, one would have to acknowledge as well that we're dealing with different levels of infrastructure across different continents, which do contribute to some of the accidents as well. So, I said, just in conclusion, I mean, first of all, it is not acceptable that so many lives are lost in the transport of dangerous goods. Every country needs to regulate the transport of dangerous goods, and ideally to adopt one of the existing regulatory systems. Where we have regulatory systems, we have better control in relation to driver training, in relation to vehicle standards, emergency response, as Lee will have referred to earlier. There's a whole structure, and most of all, probably awareness of the hazards that are being transported on our roads. We need more, ideally we need more harmonized regulation. The fragmentation of regulations does cause confusion. It makes it more difficult for us as advisors as well. And in the ideal world, we would aspire to having a single set of regulations for the transport of dangerous goods, just as there are for sea and for air transport. So I think that pretty well wraps up my piece. So I'll hand it back to you, Reshma. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. And that is true. It is one of the most challenging one of the most challenging areas when DG hits the ground. When it's on by road, the compliances in various countries are so different, to the point that when you have to do a door delivery, it's always very challenging, and you have to find out the proper markings, as you mentioned, the orange panels. It would be different in the UK, it would be different in Europe, it would be different in the US. And ideally, all of us who are involved in dangerous goods logistics, all of us would like to have one single regulation all around the world, and where we have proper enforcement as well. So the enforcement's another thing as well, and self-regulation by shippers. Thank you so much, Michael. We will come back to questions when everyone is done, when all the speakers have completed with their presentation. So now I would like to introduce our third speaker. Our third speaker for today is Mr. Ravindran K. Mr. Ravindran works very closely with me. In fact, he's our key consultant and trainer. He handles maritime dangerous goods, but he's more of a safety man. And he sailed, so he's got the sailing experience. He's worked with the ports and terminal as a safety manager. And he's also done a lot of work with GIZ in terms of UNDP programs with various ASEAN ports in terms of consultancy and training. So he's going to talk to us about the challenges in maritime dangerous goods logistics. Ravi, are you ready to share your screen?
Yes, thank you, Rishma.
Welcome.
Okay, so we have got, okay.
Have you got your screen
Yeah,
shared,
I've got
Ravi?
my screen there. Is it, can you
No, it's
view
not
that?
showing on our side, Ravi. Can you just try it again? Just if you can click the share screen button.
Oops.
Yes.
Now you get it, yeah?
Yes, just put it on the
Slide mode.
slide mode. Thank you very much, Ravi. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Rishma. Thank you. Good evening to everybody. And this is a very interesting topic, talking about challenging key gaps in the maritime dangerous goods logistics. I mean, if you look into dangerous goods by sea, basically we have three modes of sea transport. Yeah, we have one is the container mode, the other one is your tankers, and then you also have in bulk shipments. Yeah? So they have different sets of regulations, and they are all governed by IMO, International Maritime Organizations, and you have close to about 200 regulations on maritime. Yeah. So if you look into the risk, I'm not going to go into the regulation part because I see Michael has already covered that, and also Lee has also touched a bit on the rail part. So just go into the safety part of it. And you've noticed that transporting dangerous goods by sea, you have some of the risk factors involved: loss of life, fire explosion. Yeah, you have major explosion in the port recently in Beirut. And of course, you have corrosions, you have poison, radiation, and most importantly is marine environment pollution. And this is becoming a serious concern now globally, especially after the Exxon Valdez IMO have actually tightened up a lot of rules and regulation, ecological hazards, and also we touch on threat from terrorism. You find a lot of tanker ships being hijacked in Somalia, and of course they have put in a lot of safety measures there, security measures to prevent those kind of terrorism attacks. Disasters at sea, I think we have seen last year, 2019, there have been quite a number of maritime incidents, and these are all actually mostly involved with container ships. Yeah. With regards to tanker ships, they've already reduced. After Exxon Valdez incident, they've put in a lot of regulation in terms of the tank construction. So now you find that tanker vessels all having double hull, and then they also have this thing called STCW with regards to competency level for the crew and officers. Yeah? So it's only on the container operation we find that quite a number of incidents still taking place, and this is mainly because of the shore practices. Yeah? If you find that those warehouse operators, those who are actually packing containers, they are actually not packing according to the IMO requirements. Yeah? So IMO requires you to actually secure your cargo, and they have a lot of safety measurements. But you find that cargo coming in, during my time in Northport, I find that a lot of cargo, dangerous goods coming into the port, they are not properly secured. So as you know, if you have sailed before, you'll find that at sea, the containers will be doing samba, tango, yeah. The container cargoes will be dancing a lot. And if you want to experience earthquake and you want to experience the cyclone, you find that the cargoes also will be experiencing the same thing, yeah. So if you don't secure them, and when it comes to the port, you'll find there's container damage, cargo damage, yeah. And you'll find, for example, in this photograph, you have actually a cargo which actually self-ignited, and it was just burning inside a container. Yeah, and this is an incident happened last year in near China. One of the dangerous goods container actually caught fire, and it actually damaged the whole vessel. Yeah. Same thing in Vietnam. Of course, Vietnam, you also have APL Vancouver having the similar issues. Yeah, it started off with a fire at the cargo bay, and it just spread through the whole hatch cover. Yeah, and you find that shipping lines are putting a lot of regulations, and they are increasing their safety requirements when actually you are packing DG into a container, and you're loading to their vessels. Yeah? So although IMDG code provides the guidelines, but shipping lines have also increased their requirements. Yeah? That means they're actually going above what the IMDG requires. Yeah? So that means we find that shippers will need to take into account a lot of safety requirements. So similarly in Lan Chebang port last year, okay, and you find there was a fire in port, yeah, and most of these fire results actually from undeclared or misdeclared dangerous goods. Yeah, that means shippers are not giving the true picture of what they are shipping. So that actually makes very difficult for those working on board to know what is the content of the container. Although you declare in the document, it states the classes, but what actually is declared, sometimes we really cannot verify them. Yeah. And some containers are poorly packed, you know, they are not really secure. So you find, like in this photograph here, you find that the container, I mean the cargo has already been scattered inside the container. You know, it's not well secured. So this is just to summarize what the list of incidents on board ship. This is actually prepared by a consulting group in London Brewery Shipping. And the cost for these damages are pretty extensive. Yeah? So TT Club has already come up with a study, and they're saying that every 2 months there's a container ship on fire, every 60 days. And this is actually becoming a very serious issue. And shipping lines are putting a lot of requirements these days, yeah. And we find that the cargo loss runs to millions, yeah, and sometimes it just destroys the whole ship. So that's okay. So what are the reasons? You find that misdeclared, undeclared dangerous goods, yeah. So in Malaysia, we are, to a certain extent, we are pretty lucky because we have the authorities doing serious checking. We have the Marine Department that actually they verify those competent people, and then you also have the port authorities, Klang port authorities actually issuing certificates to competent people. That means people who are actually going to pack DG, they have to know the IMDG code, they have to sit for an exam, and then they are given a kind of number. Then you need to sign your multi-modal document after you have packed your cargo. Yeah? So that is pretty good in terms of what we are doing here at the moment. And in terms of the local regulatory, we have the Department of Safety, Department of Environment. They are also putting a lot of emphasis on education and enforcement. These are two areas which they are looking at the moment. Then you have also insufficient, inappropriate cargo securing. Yeah, so there's a new code now under CTU packing code. Yeah, it requires all shippers, if you are shipping out any types of cargo in material, whether it's DG or non-DG, you are required to have a proper storage plan inside the container. Especially for DG cargo, you're required to kind of draw a layout. How are you actually storing your DG cargo into a container? Then you also have something called wrong, inappropriate packaging. Yeah. So you find that shippers are trying to cut costs at times. They are trying to cut short in terms of the packaging, and they want to just do the normal packaging, which is not required. Yeah, I mean, the requirement for IMDG is you have to have a certified packaging code. If you're packing DG, Of course, you have the ships that are, they've done a study and they found that some of the large vessels, yeah, they are having a lag in terms of firefighting protection system. And IMO is looking into that at the moment. Now, of course, they are looking at tight control on audit inspection on vessels. Yeah. So a marine department does regular inspection on vessels to ensure that they comply to SOLAS and MAPOL requirements. Yeah. Some of the tools that are used to manage dangerous goods operation by sea is one, of course, if you are using container, that means the IMDD code is very applicable. And if you are using, if you're packing by bulk, then you have the IMBC code. And if you go by tankers, they have another tanker code. Yeah? And then the latest one is that you have the Harmonisation, GHS guideline. Yeah, that means all shippers will also now have to comply with the GHS requirement. And then they also have to comply with the CTO packing code, IMO, ILO code of practice for packing. So the packers are at the moment given a lot of guidelines. If you're going to pack DG into a container, there are certain guidelines they will have to comply before they can actually sign off the document. And you have technology. We are using a lot of technology these days. All ship planning is done by technology. And you have this portal where you can actually, the control system is all done at booking department. The shipper has to key into a system, and the shipping line will actually pick up all the information, and it does their whole planning, storage planning on board vessel. Yeah? And of course, they also have port restrictions. Certain ports you find certain cargo you have to do your discharge at deep water. Yeah? They don't allow you to come alongside. Yeah? Especially if you have a river port, they don't allow you to go into the berth. So these are the requirements that are now in place. What are the challenges we have in terms of global dangerous goods in terms of in the COVID period? You have receiving goods on time. Yeah, because of the COVID, you find that shipping lines, the port operators, the shippers, they are all limited in their movement, and you need to move cargo in and out on time. Yeah, and then you also have timely information. Information has to come on time so that you can get on board ship. And then, of course, you have securing the vessel, because you find that with the COVID pandemic, some vessels can't actually call into the port. And I was told last week there was one vessel supposed to come into Port Klang, but because one of the crews was infected by COVID, the ship didn't call into the port. So you have cargo being held up in the port area. Yeah. So shipping dangerous goods out of time. Then you have providing complete information to your partners. This is very important. You need to ensure that your information goes timely, especially if you're going to certain ports in the US, certain ports in the in Europe, especially in the US. You have all the regulations with regards to CTPAT, security issues. Yeah, so you need to have timely information, communicating with customers and suppliers. Yeah, because if you're talking about dangerous goods, you cannot store them in the port area for a long time. And we want you to take it out as far as possible. Tracking of shipment. Yeah, this is now very, very important that we are actually with the IT system, you are able to track your cargo worldwide. Yeah. And some of the challenges you have the people issue. You need to educate shippers with regards to packing of dangerous goods, because it's very much different shore and sea. Yeah? Most of the packers who are packing containers at shore, they don't know actually at sea there is a different scenario. So they tend to just slack, they don't secure the cargo effectively. Yeah? So we have to train these people to ensure them movies how ships move at sea. Yeah? Then you look at the processes. Now you're looking at security is a top issue. And technology, yeah, you have a lot of technology in terms of securing, in terms of information transfer, passing of information. Yeah? So these are the things that we want to look at in terms of transportation of dangerous goods. Factors that are distracting compliances, basically you're looking at budget constraint, shipping lines having with cargo issue, yeah, boxes are not coming on time. There are a lot of players in the market. lack of technology adaptation, yeah. And then you find senior level, the level of awareness with regards to dangerous goods is still a bit low. Yeah? So this is why you have quite a number of vessels actually catching fire at sea, and yeah. So what are the gaps you have? Ability to handle reverse logistics. Yeah, you're looking at e-commerce. You're looking at moving e-documents. There's going to be paperless. And in this paperless, you want to actually remove any kind of fraud item. You don't want people to misuse the e-commerce facility and try to ship in undeclared DG, or try to, don't declare DG cargo, yeah. And then you have something called reliable master data. You have to ensure that whatever you declare in your document is captured in your master data. Because if you look into the IMDG code, yeah, you have quite a number. The list of chemicals are close to about 3,000. So you want to ensure that the information is reliable. And limited technology, one of the reasons why some organizations, if you do work in Cambodia and Myanmar, there is still lack of technology. Yeah. So they are not unable to move their information very effectively. Okay, then you have the other issue with regards to regulators is you want to look at the infrastructure, yeah, and infrastructure gap, as what Mike was mentioning earlier, that in Nigeria and African countries, yeah, you still have certain serious incidents happening. One of the reasons is because of infrastructure gap. The roads, the ports, yeah, the IT system is still not in line with the global requirements, yeah. So this is one of the factors that we want to look at. Moving ahead, we want to look at information accessibility, yeah, how we can actually improve information across the world, yeah, and we want to see how we can communicate and upgrade the technology, effective communication in terms of data management. And IMDG, or dangerous goods, is all about data management. What class will tell you how you can respond, any incidents, you know how to respond. It also tells you what type of packaging you have to use. It also tells you what sort of segregation. So this data information has to be very accurate. So it's very important that we look at how we upgrade the technology in our location. So with that, I conclude my presentation. And one of the major challenges, just to conclude, is educating the shippers on maritime dangerous goods, just to let them know that the sea and the shore, they have two different conditions. And at sea, it's much more horrendous. You need to do more detailed packing of DG to ensure you prevent incidences. Back to you, Rishma.
Thank you very much, Ravi. So it boils down to information, the way you put it, the lack of information, probably certain compliance issues, in terms of the shipper, and adaptation of technology. One of the, in fact, what we would ideally like to see is blockchain coming in. So the creator of the information then creates it once and everybody shares it, and we can have all these problems sorted out in terms of information sharing. Thank you so much, Ravi, for your presentation. Now we go to our fourth speaker, and today joining us from Australia, from Brisbane, is Victor Gado. And Victor is the Director of Transport Compliance Safety Training. He holds, of course, qualifications in accounting and logistics. He's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, and he's going to talk to us about dangerous goods storage. And it's a very interesting area because we just witnessed what happened in Beirut with the explosion of the ammonium nitrate. And he's going to give us some examples in the Australian perspective. So without much ado, can I pass the floor to you, Victor?
Thank you. So yes, welcome, and thank you very much for allowing us from the land down under taking part here in a global community talking about this topic of dangerous goods. Listening to the other presenters, I've certainly drawn some interesting parallels and from everybody. And some of the things I'd just like to touch back on is, Reshma, you mentioned about compliance, information, communication, supply chain overlooking compliance, and the most important thing was, does supply chain understand dangerous goods? Lee mentioned auditing by governments, and Michael's takeaway from myself was having a single set of global regulations similar to sea and air. And Reverend was interesting comments around the consignor and the driver, packaging, and does business really understand in what they have to comply to? And does, from a risk point of view, does executives fully understand the business that they're really in? So let's see if this works. Yep. Okay, so what is dangerous goods? What I continue to find is that organisations see dangerous goods as a common commodity, just as what we might buy a typical consumer goods. And in the education and the training sector, the items that we use in the household, people quite often don't understand the implications from a supply chain on how the goods came from the raw materials to sitting on our bench tops whether in the office or at home. And I think we need to remind ourselves that any of those class labels which is uniformed around the world through the United Nations do present an immediate and catastrophic danger to people, property and the environment. Now, with that in mind, we have a lot of regulations here in Australia to control whether it's a storage or by road, rail and maritime and by air. Down here in Australia, we've got this principal body called Safe Work Australia. Now, their major task is to cascade out from a process of understanding through codes of practices to the various states and territories within the country for all the storage and handling is for DG, along with transport. It doesn't matter what sector. Now, that particular process typically works extremely well from a legislative perspective. Where we continue to see gaps occurring is organisations that just simply don't recognise that they have an implication into the safe storage of dangerous goods and or how to manage the transport from a logistical context. And the logistics also goes back into the warehousing here in the country in relation to transshipment, life cycles of the dangerous goods, the packaging life cycles, and also the issue around what's the segregation rules and do they fall in line with the product safety data sheets. So we have these things called, through Safe Work Australia, major hazard facilities guides. We have also the transport by road and rail as regulated by the Australian Dangerous Goods Code published through the National Transport Commission. The transport by air is regulated by the Civil Aviation Authority of Australia and the maritime people through the Maritime Safety Authority. Now, each one of those publications, when you look at them, read them, are very, very good. They're very insightful and they give a fantastic amount of context and content in the storage specific to that channel. One of the issues is around channel management. How do we move from one channel of distribution to another, to another, to another, both upstream and downstream, and have that as a seamless operation? Because one of the issues we suffer down here, and I don't know if it's a problem around the globe, is around volume in the context of volume of the storage or the movement of dangerous goods. If we're talking about warehousing, etc., once a warehouse gets to a certain volume, we then have to have that particular area licensed and regulated by the governments in terms of audits and functionality of their business processes. But up until that particular site gets to a predetermined set of volumes, it's really up to the organisation to self-manage. So there's a huge potential safety understanding on, are we doing safe practices, or do we have particular gaps? And it's similar on the road, where legislatively drivers may not need to be licensed to carry dangerous goods if they fall below certain volume thresholds. Now, from an understanding there, it certainly makes sense, but from the context of the broader issue around risk to the public, risk to the safety, which has already been mentioned several times, one must question the validity for that, both here and from an international supply chain as well. And I concur with the other speakers that air and maritime, I think, is the most best managed from a due diligence perspective, and understood by the channel partners in private enterprise who work with the authorities to ensure the safe carriage of those products. Now, just to be clear on this one, the question I asked myself, could that Beirut style disaster occur here in Australia? Well, regrettably, something similar did happen here several years ago. But I thought I'd just experiment back through our principal document, which is the Australian Dangerous Goods Code, which all the other sub-authorities, including the storage of dangerous goods, refer back to. And if we look there, there's something like about 9 different classes of ammonium nitrate that's listed in our official documentation, all with different UN numbers, and most of them with the same class, and a lot of them with all of them with the same HazChem, which has been mentioned before. Now, the bottom line is that ammonium nitrate has got a huge risk of reaction and violent explosion when it has the wrong sensitising agent put to it. Now, we had that a particular incident there a few years ago here in Queensland. As you can see, we've got Brisbane down there on the coastline, and a township called Charleville, which is about 800 odd kilometres by road from Brisbane to there. And there's a few images there. Now, that particular truck that had the issue was carrying approximately 50 tonnes of ammonium nitrate and caused a massive explosion. So unfortunately, these issues do occur down here, and I feel from an industry perspective, we don't learn as quickly as what we should do, and from an integration of having a safe systems of being able to handle and license and control the effective movements of dangerous goods from storage to end use. We tend to still focus on the DG in relation to general cargo, and that presents a serious sense of risks. And that presentation from general cargo is brought by organisations who don't often move or are fully understanding of the classifications within the DG codes. And I feel that the governments would like to have a bit more understanding around that and how they manage it, both from an internal context within the country, but also from an external, how do we integrate better with the international community. So some of the thoughts that we've come up with down here is around business process. And the simple things around business process is to identify and stop the other disasters occurring. So some of the ways we see it is pretty much understanding the product risks, the packaging, the segregation, and what are the various incompatibilities with that, the storage constraints, the HazChem constraints in Australia, or the HIN codes still used in Europe, as published by the UN. Now that needs to be harmonised further. We need to ensure that organisations follow the lead publications on risks associated with the dangerous goods, and more importantly, from a risk lead that through to a risk management approach on their risk registers, so those organisations can follow through and ensure that they are carrying on the ongoing safe business practices to manage those dangerous goods. We need to ensure that organisations train the relevant staff to be competent in the safe handling and storage of those dangerous goods. So one of the frustrations we continually see here is drivers, professional truck drivers, when they come to a certain volume threshold, must be licensed in the carriage of placarded dangerous goods. Unfortunately, the same level of training is not required from a consign-all perspective. So this is where the regulators are very frustrated when they see road vehicles which have got inappropriate dangerous goods packed together, and sometimes with food or food groups, which causes a huge area of frustration and poor safety. We need to ensure that organisations notify the emergency services on what dangerous goods is being stored and distributed, and modify the volume thresholds from a licensing of the sites. Now, conducting regular audits, this is a big one. To ensure that safe business practices are being followed, such as the standard operating procedure or safe work method statements, which is widely used here in Australia. Now, I think it was Michael that said, was very passionately about having a single set of regulations. I can only concur with that. And Ravindran also mentioned something very similar. With that, the risks need to be documented, relevant, and included in the risk registers, and they need to be made sure that they are valid. Suppliers, contractors fully understand the same risks as the clients in the supply chain for safety. Now, that comes back down to, does the executive really understand and do they have apportioned the amount of the financial requirements to ensure safe systems of work? That quite often could be argued in boardrooms, whether it's sufficient, and where I believe we tend to fall over as a global community, we look in the review mirror on what has happened without understanding what's in the front windscreen of what could potentially happen and what are the appropriate controls that we need to do as an integrated community. In summary, we do have the classification of DG by the United Nations, but it can be mishandled by having even if it is mishandled, can cause serious injury, death and destruction. We need to follow as a community the comprehensive instructions as published and ensure all supply chain partners are complying through regular inspections and audits. And we need to remind ourselves that it is dangerous goods. And as a dangerous good, it has got the high capacity to seriously injure, maim you and I, the community, and cause significant asset damage into the environment. That's our little icebreaker. It is a very complex area and something that I needs to, and I think we've seen that needs to have further serious ongoing conversations to harmonise this in an operational context to continually reduce the likelihood of these issues occurring around the global community. So having said all that, Reshma, it's back to yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victor. And it's true what you mentioned. I think a lot of companies still look at dangerous goods compliance more like a regulatory mandate. It's still not looked as a competitive advantage till today. I mean, if they looked at safety compliances as a competitive advantage, we will then see things moving more safely because, yes, we have this mix up of regulations or multiple regulations and regimes. And, we have packaging issues and all that, but it also boils down to, like you said, the understanding the implications of the hazards that are contained in a dangerous goods supply chain. That is so very important. Thank you very much. So we have now all our 4 speakers have presented, and we have a whole bunch of questions in the Q&A box, and I'm going to start with a few of the questions. The first question, so if we can get all our speakers on, can you turn on your videos for now, and when you're ready to answer this. So this question is actually posted to either one of the panel speakers. It's from Achilles Mapeta, if I said your name correctly. He wants to know which mode of transport is the safest. He wants to know what would panel of experts advise in terms as the best mode of transport to move dangerous goods. Who would like to answer this? Lee, Nelson, or Michael? Anyone else interested to answer this question?
Sure. I just from our experience and the statistics we've seen in Canada, if we're talking surface transportation, rail is certainly the safest option versus trucks. They can all be done safely, certainly, but you're able to control a few more things. The containers are a little stronger for rail transport here.
So, but then it's also very hard to say, right? Because it's the nature of the cargo as well. Certain cargoes may not be, suitable for air transportation and so on and so forth. But the safest for land transport, yes, is rail. Thank you very much for answering that for us, Lee. And we have another question from Edward Lau, and Edward Lau actually wants to know about how could we ensure that dangerous goods are properly declared. So I think this question, maybe I will post it to Ravi, because the misdeclaration or the non-declaration dangerous goods tends to happen a lot when it is in the sea transportation, especially in the container ship operation. So can I have you answer this question, Ravi?
Yeah, sure, Rishma. I think the most important thing is declaration comes with education. Yeah? So we need to ensure that because we have 2 groups of people who are involved in the documentation. The one who's actually doing the job physically, and the other one who's actually sitting in the office and doing the declaration. So these two parties will have to talk to each other more frequently to ensure that what they're declaring is also documented effectively. So maybe there are miscommunication. Why it happens, the misdeclaration is probably there's a miscommunication between the operations team and the administrative team. Yeah, that's what I can look at. Yeah.
Do you think also that now with COVID-19 cost challenges, do you think that shippers might probably want to skirt the declaration a bit because, with the DG surcharge, do you foresee this is going to be something that we're going to have to worry about because of, cost constraints?
No, I think the shipping line is another gatekeeper. They are putting a lot of conditions now, and they are ensuring that whatever cargo that goes on board ship is really, they actually have zero tolerance for any undeclared DG cargo. Yeah, so
Yeah,
they're putting a lot of caps there.
So we can be rest assured. That's good to know.
Yes,
That's good to know. Thank you very much. Now we have a question for you, Michael. And this question is from Harjit. Harjit Singh, he's from Malaysia. He wants to know what are the key components or syllabus that has to be covered in driver's training when it comes to DG by road? Because I believe he's taking it in our local context here. We are in the process of working out drivers and vehicle maintenance programs for road transport of dangerous goods. So I think his question is in that essence, he wants to know what exactly needs to be covered.
Well, the one I'm most familiar with would be ADR, and that there's a very structured approach to driver training there, in that all drivers have to attend a course which is given by an approved training provider, and then they have to sit an examination. And there are 2 levels of this: if they're carrying dangerous goods and packages, And then there's an advanced level if they're driving a tanker vehicle, and they must recertify every 5 years. The content of the course is it starts around understanding the classes, having which is fundamental to the whole understanding of dangerous goods. Then that they would be aware of all the marks and labels, both for packages and then the placarding of tanks and vehicles. The documentation they require, the equipment that must be on the vehicle. Again, ADR prescribes fire extinguishers, wheel chocks, spill kits, that they know what should be on it and know how to use that equipment. And just part of the kind of if you like, the local emergency response on the vehicle. So overall, it's I think it's a good structured system, and there's a common examination that they have to pass, and if they don't pass it, they cannot drive the vehicle until they are successful.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. Yeah, because there are certain countries in Asia, like Malaysia itself, we have not yet ratified the ADR. So I think that is where the gap, because the ADR does clearly identify in terms of the driver's training in having knowledge about dangerous goods. And also, I think one of the very important thing is the vehicle inspection and maintenance before you set out to pick up your goods, right? So these are the kind of areas that we see some gaps in this part of the planet. In Asia, I suppose, certain parts of Asia, we're seeing that. So thank you very much for answering that question. Now, there is another question here. And I don't know, I guess, Ravi, maybe you can answer this, because this one is about who certifies ships, who certifies whether ships are suitable to carry dangerous goods. Would you like to answer this, or Ravi? I guess this is IMO's work because it's under the SOLAS convention.
Before ship construction, before you build a ship, the shipping line probably will identify what type of cargo they're going to carry. There's a business plan in shipping lines, you see. So they will decide what sort of ships they want to build, and based on that, they will get approval from the necessary regulators. Yeah, and of course, you have a lot of safety requirements. You have a lot of survey documents. Yeah, so there is a long process in terms of shipbuilding to actually cater for certain cargo. Yeah. So depending on the shipping lines,
Yeah, thank you. And anyway, they are guided by the SOLAS convention. The SOLAS convention clearly defines that.
MAPOL and all this comes in,
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Ravi. Victor, we have a question for you on DG storage. This warehouse storage of dangerous goods. This question is from Kim Hassel. Warehouse storage of dangerous goods often require very specific drainage and storage separation requirements, even when it comes to whiskey. How many warehouses actually comply with storage regulations? I mean, that is also something that I would like to see. In Australia, I believe you already have a regulation for dangerous goods storage for both the manufacturer and the service provider. Maybe you can give us some insights on this, Victor.
Yeah, it's a very good question that's been asked. In terms of how many are actually doing it well, there's not a lot of quality evidence that says that some warehouses have got their processes in place correctly. It comes down to, as I mentioned, through Safe Work Australia, through what's called as a major hazard facility. So any one of us in this room right now could be dealing with dangerous goods. And if we're below the volume thresholds, and because we're below the volume thresholds, that organisation or distribution centre may not even be aware that how to safely handle those DGs, and where they must not have any food or food groups, including whiskey. Because of the risk of contamination to the humans or any particular other avenues such as plants and animals. So I guess it comes back down to two things. Organisationally, if that organisation is proactive and they recognise they're dealing with dangerous goods, they will do everything as best they possibly can and comply with the various safety standards as prescribed by the Safe Work Australia and the other codes of practice. Versus the other level of organisations that simply just don't care. And that is where the real risk is. And that's where the regulators are continually pulling their hair out in striving to eliminate that particular avenue of business. But it is becoming more and more difficult, I feel, as organisations seek to become more efficient, as what they class as more efficient through cost reduction. And that's where the real level of danger is occurring. And I believe we've got a lot of future safety risks that are going unnoticed because of that particular avenue. And that's where the evidence is pointing, but it's difficult to quantify.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's going to be a real challenge where people are going to look at cutting corners here and there because of certain cost constraints and whatnot. Thank you very much for answering that question. We have actually 3 more questions, and one of the questions is about, maybe it's not for the panel of speakers, we will leave it for CILT International to answer this question, because they want to know about what kind of collaboration efforts can be taken by the international office to make sure that, you know, we have some form of global compliance, at least within all the countries that we are present in. But there is this question on by Achilles, and he wants to know, maybe all of you can give us about 2-minute answer on this question. Do we have any indication on the impact the regulation has on countries that prohibit the transport of dangerous goods? And they're saying that certain countries prohibit the movement of dangerous goods at night. So maybe we'll start with Lee and then move to Ravi and Michael, and then Victor, if you don't mind. Lee, is there any sort of restriction in Canada and all that when it comes to moving DG at night?
No, not in general. We actually see some locations, more urban areas, that only allow things to be moved at night when commuter traffic is off the roads. But I can't think of a study or a case where, you know, the intentional transport at night's been banned in Canada or North America.
Yeah, it doesn't seem right, because that's exactly the time when you have the least amount of traffic on the road and would be the safest time to move something that's really dangerous. Exactly. What about Ravi? Do you have anything to add on? I mean, in terms of how the impact, let's not take the night bit, but the impact of these regulations so far, they prohibiting certain areas of trade, or?
I know is in Mekong River, they are a bit strict on moving of dangerous goods at night, especially when you're moving from Sinovale into Phnom Penh, because of the limitation in terms of emergency response, because if you have any spillage in the river of Mekong, then it's a bit difficult for them to handle, especially at night. And that is also being a high density populated area along the river. So they are a bit strict on that part, Mekong River, yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Ravi, Michael, are there any specific rules about this? For instance, with regards to any safety issues related to moving goods at night?
None come to mind immediately. I mean, there are some, but as Lee says, I think they tend to work the other way, and to encourage the movement at night, particularly in some of the tunnels. ADR has some restrictions on tunnels, but again, they would tend to be encouraging dangerous goods transport at night to avoid transport when the tunnels are most crowded during commuting hours.
All All right.
I'm not aware of any kind of research or any
On
significant.
that area, right? On that area, exactly. And do these regulations actually, Victor, if you could answer this, do these regulations hamper growth for companies?
No, not in today's day and age. I see the regulations, certainly from an Australian perspective, have very much been written in conjunction with industry and industry participation in relation to, are they workable? And I think that's a very positive step. So I guess it comes back down to a two-speed understanding. Those who truly want to understand and the legitimate, safe supply chain versus the other type of supply chain, which fosters on cost cutting, and that's where the real danger is, which has come out a few times. In relation to nighttime, we don't have any restrictions in Australia. The only thing we do have is if there's loading or unloading occurring, the driver of the placarded load of dangerous goods must have adequate light to be able to safely do their particular task.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Victor, for that. And actually, the final question is pretty much the final hour. Can I say we've already done pretty much an hour and a half of running through, looking at perspectives from literally different parts of the world, understanding on the various modes of transport and the storage challenges and the compliance gaps, especially when you're managing global supply chains that have dangerous goods moving through them. Now, coming to the question that was posted in the Q&A button about CILT partners collaborating together, I'm going to now pass the mic to Keith. So Keith can answer this question, and Keith can then wrap up the session for today. Thank you very much, fellow panel speakers, for making this a really interesting event today. And Keith, over to you.
Thanks, Reshma, and thanks to the speakers for an absolutely excellent session. I thought that there was a lot of information there. A reminder to all attendees that we will be, so the webinar itself has been recorded, and we will be releasing that with all the content of all those presentations online on Monday. I know there was at least one question about can we see the presentations. Well, you can see those live through webinars, and a huge number of people connect and see the material that way. So this is a very critical topic. The question that I think Reshma, I thought might pass to me, I'm not particularly equipped to answer this really in many senses, in that as an organization, we tend to be very well organized country by country in knowing who to link into and what organizations to link into. So in the UK, there are a number of bodies responsible for rail and transport, who we can, and maritime as well, who we can link to. The international team that I have is a small team, and we don't tend to have the expertise to know who to connect to on a global issue. And I think it's an area where we need to create more capability, not just in dangerous goods, so that's a very key topic, but in other areas. Just in the last few weeks, actually, we've been involved on the maritime issue of that's out there, a very critical issue about labour being used on the seas, not able to get back to port, and all the human and health and safety dimensions of that. And we actually have been able to connect with a lot of the maritime organisations in on that, but there are many of them. I've been surprised by how many there are, and I guess this is one of those topics. So I think we do need to take that away from an international viewpoint. And if the experts on the call have got any views, then please let me know and we'll try and progress that a bit further. So thank you. It's my pleasure to wrap up. Reshma, I think we'll be giving you the job again. You do it far better than I do. So thank you very much for chairing and moderating. And thank you to our speakers for the commitment that you've made and the information that you've shared. So wonderful presentations today, wonderful webinar. Our next one is on the 16th of November. It's around global supply chain disruption and trade. So we're looking at the theme that is very much under the spotlight in terms of COVID, lots of things happening in terms of impacts on movement of goods, not only economic, but also political. And we're doing that as part of a Central Asia conference led by CILT Kazakhstan. So it will have a Central Asian theme. It's in line with all these webinars are actually being simultaneously translated into Russian for the Central Asian market. So we've got a lot of interest there, and we're going to center this webinar around a conference being held in November. So do put that date in your diary, 16th of November. Thank you very much again for attending. Do share the links with any of your colleagues and across your countries, and have a good rest of the day, especially to Lee, who's got the whole of his day ahead of him. So thank you, everybody. Good afternoon.